Well, this morning I want you to imagine that you are a biblical character, a character right from the Bible, who lives in a very close-knit community where everybody treats everyone else as a true neighbor. Well, all except for one person, that is. And that person is you. And you're not sure why you're the outsider. You want to fit, but there doesn't seem to be an interest. You never get invited to the neighborhood barbecues. And the one time you had a neighborhood party planned at your house, absolutely nobody showed up. And so you wonder if you've done something wrong toward your neighbors, but nothing really comes to mind. Perhaps your neighbors are just jealous of your wealth. I mean, after all, you've got quite a bit of wealth. You're one of the wealthiest people in the neighborhood, and everyone knows you have money, lots of money, even though they do not. So that might be it. But then you begin to wonder, does it have anything to do with the way that you look? I mean, after all, you're very short in stature, while many of the neighbors in the neighborhood tower over you in height. You tower over them in wealth, so I don't know, that might be it. Or perhaps it's because of your name, Zacchaeus, which means pure. And you certainly see yourself as pure, clean, unadulterated, untainted, wholesome among this group of uncivilized heathens who don't even have the decency to invite you to a neighborhood event. Or you know what? It could be your career that you chose. I mean, after all, you are a government employee. In fact, you even have a very fancy title for your job, Superintendent of Customs. And in Latin, it sounds even better, publicanus. But any way you cut it, you're the tax collector. Yeah, you work for the IRS. Forcing your fellow neighbors to cough up enough money for the emperor in Rome, and anybody unwilling to pay their fair share, well, then they've got to contend with the Roman soldiers showing up at their door for a very unpleasant visit. But that's really of no matter to you. You're only doing your job, right? You're lonely, yes. But you're wealthy, yes. And you certainly have a steady job until you retire, so you really have little need for anything else. Except for perhaps a meaningful relationship with someone, anyone really. I mean, who would even look at you? Who would hold a conversation with you or even dine with you? It would really be nice to have somebody to call a friend, even a friendly stranger to feed that loneliness that's in your heart. But then a thought occurs to you. Didn't you recently hear somebody talking in the marketplace about somebody saying that there was this rabbi that was coming to town, this incredible teacher from Galilee? He was going to be passing through town. Yeah, his name was Jesus. And he was coming to Jericho, and perhaps, just maybe, if you play your cards right, you get to shake this guy's hand, maybe even receive a blessing from this holy man. That would impress the neighbors. And so you get ready for the day, and the day arrives. And this day, it's going to be different from all other days. In fact, you sense that this day holds such promise that one day someone will even write a story about it. And you would be right. And we find that story today in the Bible, in Luke's Gospel, chapter 19. Here's how the story was recorded. Jesus entered Jericho, and was passing through it, and there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and he climbed up a sycamore tree to see Jesus, because Jesus was going to pass by that way. Jesus came to the place. He looked up and said to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, hurry down, come down, for I must stay at your house today. And so Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble and said, "He's gone to be the guest of somebody who's a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will now give to the poor. And if I have done anything to defraud another human being, I will pay back 4 times as much." And then Jesus replied, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." May we be blessed in the reading and the hearing of this ancient yet sacred biblical witness. Zacchaeus, that's an interesting name. Zacchaeus, the pure one, the tax man. You know, back in those days, everyone suspected those who were tax collectors of overtaxing the honest wage earner. Why? In order to stuff their own pockets before they sent the true tax on to Rome. So nobody liked Zacchaeus. I mean, in that community, absolutely no one. So why would Jesus even give him the time of day? You know, we grew up hearing the story, for many of us, of Zacchaeus, the little man. The wee little man was he who climbed up in the sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And I'm always fascinated that as Jesus walked through the neighborhood today with his entourage, this huge mob around him, that he suddenly looked up and saw Zacchaeus in the tree above him, and he stopped, as did the throng of people around him. Did Jesus just intuitively know that Zacchaeus was overhead? And you know, not only that, Jesus called him by name. Now, Jesus didn't live there, so how did he know this guy's name? Perhaps Jesus heard whispers from the crowd as he drew near to that tree. Oh, there's that horrible tax collector, Zacchaeus, hiding up in that tree. Or did he, being Jesus, just know his name? And then Jesus instructed Zacchaeus to climb down, not to take his time, but immediately, without haste, in order to do what? In order that Jesus might dine with him. You see, in the ancient days, when you dined with another person as a guest, the person giving the meal, breaking the bread, had a responsibility to care for your every need. So I really like the way that Jesus kind of boldly invited himself to dinner. Out of hunger? No. He dined with Zacchaeus that day because Jesus knew that there was something, a longing, a desire, something in Zacchaeus' heart. Jesus knew of the loneliness, then the depth of the loneliness in his heart. And Zacchaeus certainly believed that his life could be and would be changed because of his encounter with Jesus. And it was. His life certainly was changed. He literally repented. He began to see a new way to live, a new way to relate to all those around him. He grew in compassion and love for his neighbors. He encountered Jesus, and as a result, he repented. He made a course correction in his life. He immediately began to model his life to be more like Jesus' life. What an honor. What an honor for wee Zacchaeus. What a delight that he must have experienced when he was discovered in that tree. What grace. What amazing grace. Because you see, Zacchaeus, he sought out Jesus. And he ended up getting a whole lot closer to Jesus than he had ever hoped for. And in that one moment, his life was forever changed. God says if we seek, we will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. And I truly believe that so many people today wonder where God is in their lives. And perhaps some of you here this morning, you ponder that very same question. But I want you to consider this. If we never go looking for God in our lives, then how can we expect to have a meaningful relationship with God? I mean, look at Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus didn't even allow his vertical limitations to be an excuse to quit looking for Jesus. No. And so what obstacles do we need to overcome in order that we might see Jesus in our lives every day? And here's something else to consider. You know, Zacchaeus, he could have declined the offer with Jesus that day. After all, it wasn't a command, it was an invitation. And there are in our own lives these grace-filled opportunities that are never forced upon us. But we must be willing to seek those moments, to yearn for them, and in the end to finally yield, to literally surrender to this awesome gift of love and grace. Zacchaeus, he surrendered to his old way of life in order to embrace this new life of grace. And you know what? What Zacchaeus had to give up was nothing compared to what he was being offered. So are you willing to surrender this morning to what it is that Christ offers you? I have no doubt that in this 21st century, there are a lot of people who feel invisible in today's world. They may even be in the midst of a crowd, a throng of people, and yet they feel as if nobody sees them or hears them or cares about them. And maybe you're in a place in your life where you're uncertain about whether you're visible or invisible. You're unsure that if Jesus would even stop for you and notice you if you were up in that tree. Well, here's the good news. And I mean, this is really good news. My friends, you are all individually, each one of you, of great value to God. We are all of great value of God. And lest you doubt, Jesus most certainly would stop. He would look up, he would address you by name, and he would invite you into a relationship. He does that every day, all around the world. Jesus is constantly reaching out to people, building relationships and connecting them with the love of God. And if you're at a place in your life where you're thinking, well, where am I in this give and take? Well, we've got to be willing to run ahead of the chaos of life. We've got to be willing to climb up out of the depths of this broken world and anticipate with hope and with grace and with faith an encounter with Christ who invites himself into our very lives. You see, Jesus was for his neighbors. And I believe that Wesley United Methodist Church, at our heart of hearts, we too are a church that is for our neighbors. But it really begins by honoring the neighbors around us. One of my favorite contemporary Christian theologians is Barbara Brown Taylor. And she offered that she came late in life to the understanding that God loved her, but not just her spirit, but also her flesh. And she came to that understanding finally, not by reason, she says, but by faith. And when she understood that, she then understood that it was not possible to trust God, that God loved her, without also trusting that God loved all bodies everywhere. Here's what she offers. She writes, God loves the bodies of hungry children and indentured women, along with the bodies of sleek athletes and cigar-smoking tycoons. While we might not have one other thing in common, we all wore skin. We all had breath and beating hearts. Most of us had wept, although not necessarily for the same reasons. Few of our bodies worked the way we wanted them to, and the vast majority of us were afraid of dying. My body, she writes, my body is what connects me to all these other people. Wearing my skin is not a solitary practice that one brings me into communion, but one that brings me into communion with all these other embodied souls. It is what we most have in common with one another. In Christian teachings, followers of Christ are called to honor the bodies of our neighbors just as we honor our own. Honoring our neighbors. Our neighbors are no different than us. Each of us, we have a solitary life that yearns for communion. There are all those times that all of us feel lonely. We yearn for relationship, but we also yearn too to be honored for who we are, as do all our neighbors around us. So I want to invite you to view the story of Zacchaeus from the Bible this morning, not about a story of religion, but it's a story about relationship. Say that word with me. Relationship. Truly. And likewise, life with God that we walk every day through Jesus Christ is all about relationship. Say that word with me again. Relationship. Because you see, Jesus cared about the least and the lost. Time and time again, story after story in the Bible reveals how God, in the form of Jesus, came to be in relationship with the least and the lost, the sinners, the lepers, the thieves, the murderers, the poor, the dying, the hungry, and yes, even a small, dishonest tax collector. Jesus cared deeply about them. Jesus was for his neighbors. And I believe that Wesley Church, at our core heart of hearts, we too are for our neighbors. Amen? And that's why we created the vision a couple of years ago that we have. Our mission is steadfast, should never change. Our mission is and should always be to make disciples for Jesus Christ. Why is that our mission? Because Jesus said in the Bible, that is your mission. Go and make disciples. The way that we uniquely and distinctly live that out here at Wesley, because every church will live it out differently, we envision doing that by reaching, building, and connecting. And I like to do this by reaching, building, and connecting. Say those three words with me. Reaching, building, connecting. Now do the hand motions with me. Come on. Reaching, building, connecting. That's an easy way to remember our vision. Reaching, building, and connecting. And we do that because when we reach, build, and connect, we are honoring the way that Jesus lived his life. Jesus was always about reaching, building, and connecting. Jesus reached out to Zacchaeus, right? He wanted to build a relationship, a meaningful relationship with him in order to connect him with the love of God. It's all about relationship. And you see, by reaching and building and connecting with Zacchaeus, his life was changed dramatically. He became a person that decided, I want to be a disciple too. I want to live like Jesus. I'm going to give back manyfold what I was taking from my neighbor. And I want to love my neighbor and care about my neighbor. Jesus truly cared about the least and the lost. And so our vision to reach and build and connect means that we want to live like Jesus as well. We want to change lives the way that Jesus did. And so we have a neighboring team that was formed last fall here at Wesley. You might recall, if you were here last fall, we did a summer series, it was August, September, on neighboring. And out of that came a neighboring team. And through the short winter that we've had, they have been putting on their thinking caps and meeting and really having great ideas about ways that we as a church can reach, build, and connect with our neighbors, the rich and the poor, and our neighbors who might even feel invisible, who wonder what this large church on Republic Road might offer to them, much less if this church even knows if they exist. Well, we do know they exist, and we do want to reach and build and connect. So how might we do that? Well, here are some ways that have emerged out of this team by putting on our thinking caps and being creative, and also looking at things that have worked in other churches that choose to reach, build, and connect. So here are some things that we might choose to do at a church. What would it look like to open our church doors and our campus, the grounds, several times a year for a non-church event? Well, how might that be lived out? Well, the sky's the limit. I mean, we can just say, what do our neighbors want to do that they could do on our lawn or in our gym or in our space here? And then several times a year, without any expectation that we're going to try to finagle them to come on Sunday or to try to join or be baptized, but we're just going to open the doors and let them come. What would that look like to just build and reach and build and connect with our neighbors just by opening our campus up once or twice or several times a year? Another plan that has worked with some neighbors and churches is partner with another church or with a school or an agency for an annual workday in the neighborhood. And this has been done with great success around the country, where a church will partner with another church or churches or an agency or schools and have an annual workday where we'll just go out and do things with our neighbor and for our neighbor. Like what? Well, say it with me, the sky's the limit, right? Well, however the Holy Spirit might lead us to do that. Here's another one. Becoming reading buddies or study buddies with children at a neighborhood elementary school. Now, this is really an interesting need. A lot of our schools need folks that will come in and be reading buddies or study buddies with the youngsters. And we do some of that with York and Campbell Elementary, way north of town. But in our immediate neighborhood, Horace Mann is our nearest elementary school, but there are many others. So there might be an opportunity there for us to reach out and build relationships with the schools and the students and the parents and the teachers by being reading buddies or study buddies. And then I'll offer one more, and this is a really intriguing one, and perhaps maybe the most challenging for a lot of churches. It's called Worship Beyond the Walls. Worship Beyond the Walls. And this is being done with great success with a lot of churches. And what that means is, rather than be in a sanctuary on Sunday morning for worship, we leave the building during that time of worship, and we go out into our neighborhood to be with our neighbors. What would we do on that Sunday morning? Well, the sky's the limit. Yeah, I mean, we can think some churches will go out into the neighborhood and do things like they'll take rolls of quarters and they'll go to a laundromat and they'll feed quarters into the washers and dryers. In order to get people to come to church and be baptized and be members? No, because we're living like Jesus. Some folks might want to prepare food and take it to the closest firehouse and feed the firefighters on a Sunday morning, or take donuts. The sky's the limit. You can go down the neighborhood and just talk to people who might be in their yards on a pleasant day. Again, the sky's the limit. But the concept of getting worship beyond the walls, rather than coming in and sitting for an hour, we are actively being like Jesus in our neighborhood during that time of worship. Now, a church as large as ours, on a typical Sunday, we might have 700 plus people go through the morning with our 4 services. It may be that a percentage of those folks might say, I really am not at a place in my life where I can get out of the building, but I'll stay here that morning and pray. And so we might have a solitary worship experience in here for the people that can't get out. And they're going to pray while the rest of us are out in the neighborhood worshiping beyond the walls. Doesn't that sound intriguing? You're shaking your heads, but doesn't that sound intriguing? I mean, seriously, worship beyond the walls. And these are just a few of the many ways that we might choose to reach out and build and connect with people in our neighborhood. So what would it look like to do even one of those, or possibly 2 of those, to reach out to our neighbors who feel invisible? It would be so meaningful, so transformative for them to see a church come to them and see them and recognize and honor them in order to just build a relationship with our neighbors and connect them with the love of Jesus Christ through our hearts and through our love. So this morning in your order of worship, in your bulletin, you should have a card that looks like this. I'm going to ask you right now to take that card out, and if you don't have one, would you raise your hand, and one of our folks in a red vest will bring one to you. I want everybody to see this. It's all about reaching, building, and connecting, but it takes more than a neighboring team. It really takes the whole church. And so I want to invite all of us who are present this morning who feel like that you have a heart for our neighbors to fill this card out, and there are baskets at the doorway as you leave this morning. The folks up in the balcony, if you'll fill out your card and just slip your hand inside the door and put it in one of the small baskets. It says neighbors at the top. The neighboring team is developing new ways to reach, build, and connect with our neighbors. Then there's a check mark. I want to know more about how I can be part of this effort. It doesn't say you're going to be on the team. It doesn't say we're going to put you to work. It really means I want to know more. And so someone will contact you from our neighboring team and talk to you about the things that are going on. My hope is that when we're ready to launch the first thing that we do, whatever that'll be, whenever that'll be, and I pray that it'll be soon, that we'll have a core group of people that'll say, let's do it. Let's do it. And so if you'll put your name and your email and or your phone on there and drop it in the basket on your way out, then that will be a great start for something new that is going to emerge. And I use that imagery of emerge because we are seed planting this morning. On a cold day, we are seed planting. And what emerges, my friends, is something that only God alone can see at this moment. But I have absolutely no doubt, I am very faithful that what will eventually be the fruit of this ministry of reaching, building, and connecting will be wonderful, it'll be succulent, and it will be filled with grace.